welcome to the SATIV webinar on conservation, traveller confidence and reputation management. Quite a mouthful. The recent IPCC report on climate change, those of you who read it last week, made for pretty grim reading. Our world is fast approaching a point of no return, and the reality is going to shape perspectives on all global environmental challenges. Joining me to unpack the latest developments around South Africa's captive breeding, animal interaction and conservation policies, and what our actions mean for our tourism industry and our reputation as a responsible destination, are Sherwin Banda, President of Africa Travel Inc., who's joining us from Southern California at 7 o'clock in the morning. Thank you, Sherwin. I've also got Shannon Guillen, who's the Chief of TreadRight and Sustainability Officer for the Travel Corporation. Thank you for joining us, Shannon. Andre Dutoy, who you all know, SATIV Director, and Kira Powers, who's the founder at Spirit of Africa, but she also wears another hat that I'm very familiar with as the head of SATS's Responsible Tourism Committee, which rolled out the Animal Interaction Toolkit and guidelines you're all familiar with. So welcome everyone. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. The chat is open, as you've all discovered, and we'd love to respond to your questions. So please add those questions in the Q&A folder for me at the bottom of your screen, and we will endeavor to get through as many as we can in the hour that we have allocated for this webinar. So without further ado, I'm actually going to hand over to Sherwin to see if he's awake. I know he is because I've had a chat to him already this morning, and ask Sherwin about the importance of conservation for his prospective traveler to Africa. How important is it? You know, are we telling ourselves a story that it's important, or are your customers actively asking you the questions around conservation and community when they are making a decision to travel to Southern Africa?
Well, firstly, good morning. It's so great to be with you. Yes, Natalia. You know, research here in the US shows that 82% of travelers are choosing to buy their travel from brands that have a vested interest with regards to sustainability. And more and more families are choosing to rear their children with a conservation bent, because we are all caretakers of this one amazing planet that we are living on. Brand USA has shared with us that the top 2 travel motivators for USA travelers is choosing ecotourism and wildlife. So clearly, having lived through a pandemic, when here in the US, our national parks don't have enough capacity for people currently to travel to. So it is important, wanderlisters and active adventure travelers are going to choose those experiences for themselves and their travelers more and more so in the future, particularly having lived through the last year and a half, and look for those experiences and companies that truly have made a difference. We just attended Virtuoso Travel Week. As you know, it's the largest luxury travel trade show. And the Luminary Award this year went to the Travel Corporation specifically around its efforts with regards to sustainability. So it's no longer just a buzzword. I think there is a conscious awakening and buying decisions that are happening for US travelers.
Wow, that's a brilliant accolade. Shannon, I'm going to haul you in here because it's you and your team, literally, that are kind of behind that brand, that TreadRight brand. Tell me a little bit about what it is that you do and how that fits into this demand that we're seeing from travelers, which is not a new demand, but obviously there's a lot more attention on it.
It's not a new demand, you're right. I would say it's by the travel industry perhaps not as well understood as I'd like it to be in 2021. You know, as Sherwin mentioned, the TreadRight Foundation, we are a part of the Travel Corporation. So all of the Travel Corporation family of brands, African Travel being one, supports TreadRight. We in turn support local community-based initiatives that fall into our pillars of planet, people, and wildlife. We also run our strategic efforts. So it's arguably threefold sustainability at our group. We have our philanthropic efforts through the TreadRight Foundation. We have our sustainability strategy, which is a 5-year strategy with 11 SMART goals, tangible goals. That's how we tread right. We also have a new, I suppose, line of experiences called Make Travel Matter. And I think that's really important to highlight, because whether it's moved beyond a policy and it's moved beyond the way in which we operate, all of those things are critical. And it's really moved into our core proposition, which of course are incredible travel experiences. And Make Travel Matter experiences are a way that we've built, which is a set of criteria to measure the way in which a maybe previously a gut feeling sustainable tourism experience actually does support the United Nations global goals. And it's been extremely successful for us in bringing on new partnerships, in consumers saying, I understand, this is what I want to do. So I think it's the clearest market-facing expression of sustainability that we have, and perhaps our most successful. And I don't think that's, I think that's very telling.
I think what you've done is you've taken something that people want to do and you've made it more tangible or easier for them to understand by having that really, really strong brand with the principles and this Make Travel Matter brand in its own right, essentially.
Trying to, and because of the enhanced discussion on sustainability, that's good and bad. What it means is we're going to have a lot of people perhaps talking about it, but perhaps not putting the work behind it. And I think it's those of us engaged in it, it's our responsibility to help the consumer and the traveler navigate that without them becoming disillusioned. And I think that's a tall ask.
Yeah. Kira, I'm going to loop you in here on the navigation, because our toolkit and the animal interaction guidelines that were put together were really aimed at helping consumers navigate this very fraught area of animal interactions. And we still have people who say, they're the animals, we're rescuing the animals, so essentially we're helping the animals. What are you on about? Tell us a little bit about the toolkit, and perhaps if you have any views on what Shannon has just said about making it easier for consumers, travelers to access experiences that tick the right boxes.
Sure, I could talk for the rest of the afternoon. So to start with what you said, tell us a bit about the toolkit and the guideline. I think the most important thing for me to say about that is that you should just quite easily turn to page 27 of the navigable PDF to get to one page that brings it all home and makes it all accessible. Because what I've always been concerned about is, even though we try to present a year's worth of work very, very simply and concisely and engagingly with navigation and everything, it's still something that I don't expect a lot of people will ever read. And that's the trouble. You have great information, and the information that you convey is backed up by your stats or your graphs or your drawings and illustrations and everything. So it's useful to everybody, but it's still, Shannon, I'm sure you found, you've just said that your most successful client-facing or market-facing strategy was something that was tangible and had criteria. And that's what we decided we had to deliver out of our year's worth of work, was something of high utility. And that was very simplistic. So it could speak to owners of activities or of animals and attractions. It could speak to government policymakers and licensing sort of permitting departments. It could speak to the tourist or traveler themselves directly without having to go through their agent. And it could speak to operators and agents who would put packages together for customers. So we distilled the whole process into a decision tree that has 6 steps. So it's a process of 6 questions, one leads into the other, and it's that beautiful system of, if you get a yes answer, you automatically fall into an exclusion zone, and if you get a no answer to something, you can progress to the next question. And it's a process of elimination, and it's only 6. So that we found was a real breakthrough. And it also helps when people aren't, a mother tongue of English and they're traveling, because you can follow the steps. So we were pleased to be able to design that. It's so crazy when we look at the 6 steps that it took us so long to decide on those exact 6 questions and how to make the yes and no's work the right way. And so that is now out there. And I think the difficulty then is just reach, how that's the challenge. I think that's the hardest job, was not doing the work and doing the research and devising this decision tree. It is letting people know that it's there and to keep it front of mind, because we know there's obviously we all know this in the industry, that there's this growing number of our source markets that will book directly, that will just be going to the TripAdvisor sites and the easy booking, the agglomerator sites to book activities and things like that. So they will be making their choices without any advice and without any guidance. So how do they know where are they going to get the tip or the hint or the click or the link that they can use the 6 steps before they go and book a cub cuddling activity or a riding, some animal ride or something like that? How do they know they can ask 6 questions that'll help them book or not book? So that's where we sit at the moment. That's the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that the right, now that you talk, and I've been working with you on this forever, Kira, but now that you mention it, sometimes you don't know the right question to ask. So to Sherwin's point, we have a traveler who is committed to traveling to make a difference. Shannon has curated an incredible array of amazing experiences that fit that need. But the consumer itself, consumers might not know what questions to ask to be able to make the right decisions. And what is it? Is it our responsibility in the travel industry to make sure that we are sharing those questions? Sherwin, are you guys doing any work in that space? How do you highlight what's right and what's wrong?
I think people who are going to travel to any one of these amazing destinations across Africa are not only seasoned travelers, but they expect that the experiences we offer tick all of those boxes. The enlightened consumer will, at the bare minimum, expect that conservation is part of what we do. And it's not an afterthought. However, the biggest concern that clients do have is, do my tourism dollars actually go back into the coffers that support these activities? And so there's some perhaps better amplification that we can share to consumers, which I think would be very, very helpful. It's interesting, we are seeing the younger travelers, like between 30 and 55, this is their top priority. They want to spend their money and tourism dollars to support sustainable, responsible travel. And that is on the increase. Across our brands in the Travel Corporation, we also have a youth brand, Kontiki. It's their number one concern as well. They are going to travel with a brand that definitely does this. So it is important, and those questions are being asked. And we are actually sharing that with our consumers. Quick tips of what to do when in destination and why to travel with us, because we are doing this responsibly.
Sure. Okay, so it's a fait accompli, essentially. If you travel and you want a bed, it's as important as the fact that the money that you're spending is going to the communities and to the conservation efforts on the ground. Shannon, do you have a particular view on what Sherwin has just said?
Yeah, and something that Kira said a few moments ago as well, with respect to how to keep it front of mind. And in addition, we have a number of elements that we work with at the Travel Corporation. So at about the same time, Kira, you were working on your guidelines, we were actually building our updated animal welfare policy and guidelines. And they came out, I remember, within just months of one another's. And yours are fantastic. They're so detailed. And we've used them on the ground in a number of cases, because as a tour operator, when we go to suppliers with animal welfare policy and our specific asks, it's incredibly useful to say, and this is what is also happening on the ground with respect to what's been delivered. So I thank you for that. It's been useful. And we build it in. Our operations teams are critical in what we do. They lead our buying. And I think that's very important to know, because what they do every year is run through, and they're doing it right now. They will make a massive list of all of our global wildlife experiences and some domestic experiences, domesticated animal experiences. And they make sure that they meet our criteria. And if they don't, and if the supplier is not willing to work with us in order to ensure that they will, then we have some decisions to make. You know, and that's how we ensure our guests that if they travel with us, they're going to be, those expectations are going to be met. And we also push the story out. You know, we did a campaign called Refuse to Ride with Céline Cousteau a few years ago that really educated the most well-meaning guests who don't understand what has to happen to an elephant in order to get it ready to ride in India, for example. So that education component is critical as well. And we work with wildlife ambassadors to do that. And there's tons of resources available. I see your question in the chat, Lee, and we, happy to pop some of those over and maybe very passively aggressively, like a Canadian would do, show them that video and see how it works.
Passive aggressive Canadians? Shannon, what are you on about? Andre, oh, there we go. So Andre's been hiding in the corner. I haven't called on him yet, but I'm going to call on him now, because for those of you who don't know Andre, I think Andre really should have you have, your heart is in conservation. You should have been a game ranger from here on out. Like, I don't even know why you do what you do. You're a game ranger at heart, seriously. Do you want to weigh in on anything that we've been discussing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Natalia. And I'm really enjoying this conversation, because we've got, I'm so confident that we've got people like Sherwin and Shannon in source markets, because it just gives us a huge amount of hope. So, yeah, Natalia, I've ended up in the insurance space, managing risk for tourism operators around Africa, whether it's an insurance policy or making sure someone's evacuated to safety after being found ill or injured by an animal in remote corners. And it's a critical part of the tourism framework, and conservation framework. So I'm quite at peace in terms of still serving my purpose on this earth, so along with my colleagues at Saturn. But what I'm finding very encouraging is, and we see it, believe it or not, in the insurance statistics as well. Sherwin, you mentioned 82% of people are insisting on some element of sustainability in tourism. That's super. And interestingly enough, 85% of people that are buying, and it's largely the young traveler, when they buy travel insurance, 85% of them are clicking on a donate button to some cause in that destination country, which is, so there you go. The stats are lining up. People are making far better decisions. They're based on sustainable practice. Dare I say, regenerative practice is the next step to leave it better than what it was before. And we know one of the little initiatives we are involved with is we've got 2,000 odd clients looking after tourists across Africa, many of them permanently established in wilderness areas. And what we have, coming from a background in operational tourism, you very quickly learn that you can't pick one thing. It's the elephant, it's the pangolin, it's Western toad and Cape toad, or whatever the case might be. But one thing we realized really, really quickly was that the ranges underpin so much of what we do. So the men and women that are out there, and there are 40-odd thousand men and women in Africa whose roles in conservation have changed from field monitoring and research to picking up arms and doing anti-poaching patrols and whatnot. And it's incredibly sad to say that since July last year, we've lost 86 rangers in Africa alone. And that is due to, yes, harsh working environments, but it's also due to their fight against poaching. And their well-being, as far as I'm concerned, is as important as animal well-being, well-being of protected flora, or whatever it might be around Africa. And stats and research surveys have shown that the ranger well-being is in an absolutely abominable state. So there you've got the guardians of our wilderness areas who I honestly believe are the foundations of our wilderness areas, upon which our tourism community is dependent at the end of the day. So we're all linked, we're a web. And unless their well-being is sorted out very quickly, we are going to have a fairly catastrophic series of events going down in these wilderness areas. So yes, we have highlighted a particular need, and we've established an insurance policy that's in partnership with the Game Rangers Association of Africa. It's called Ranger Protect. We've currently got 1,600 rangers looked after. We've literally saved the lives of 15 rangers over the last 3 years, evacuated them to safety. Those who have sadly passed away, provided their family with sustainable income. And yes, so, you know, this message is one of many that we need to communicate. Sherwin, Shannon, there's so many stories we've got to share, so many ways we've got to educate the traveler, but I'm loving what I'm hearing. And yeah, I think we all need to do our part, whether it's operator, agent, DMC, guide, traveler, we're all a part of it. No one of us can win this race. So I'm really enthused by the panel that you've got together today, Natalia, and hopefully we can all just work together to make sure that we build that traveler confidence in South Africa as a responsible wildlife destination when we open up again.
Yeah, well, we are open. It's just that
We
people
are.
don't know.
We are
Again,
open.
we need to be
We
better
are.
at telling people.
We are.
Kira, would you like to say something?
Yes, I'm making notes furiously because there's things that Andre said I want to feed into, and the others too. So I'll go through them. It might seem random, but I'm picking up on things that have been said in the last sort of 8 minutes or so. Andre, to your point that you said 85% of young travelers are clicking on the donate button when they buy insurance. I just thought I would sort of do a link to an anecdote that we found in our research, which is now sort of a year and a half old, but that in the EU and the UK mostly, our other major source markets from the US, that it used to be the mom, the wife, that made the choice of holiday destination in the family for the sort of annual or the bigger choices. And now it is the children. So parents are turning to their children to be influenced. Talk about the influencers. The influencers are the children, and children don't like animals being killed, and they don't like animals being hurt, and they follow Greta Thunberg. And, you know, that's had a major effect on choices of destinations, of activities, of what our tourists do, both when they get to countries like ours, South Africa, or in just choosing where to go, and should it be South Africa. So that was the one to follow up on. And also, Andre, again, to your point about ranger well-being, and I'm so glad you raised that because it is so easily overlooked. And it was, you know, it came up in the big debate for those of you tuned in to this webinar. South Africa's Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries recently released the recommendations from a very, very detailed and extended high-level panel looking into policies around the management and use of leopard, lion, elephants, and rhino. And there was obviously a counter argument to the ones that we were putting forward from those that own wildlife for hunting, or perhaps even canned hunting, or that are breeding, for example, rhino in large numbers. And it was fascinating when we looked at really the benefit of how far does the tourism dollar go in so-called photographic safaris, or the non-hunting type of safaris that we are all involved in, versus a hunting sort of operation that does generate revenue for a country and for business owners. And what came up not only in that comparison of how much further the tourism dollar goes in the non-consumptive use of wildlife, was also how are the staff treated, and how far is the trickle-down effect? How far does it reach in the hunting industry versus the tourism industry? So we have a lot to be proud of in being involved in what we do, but it's still highlighted that rangers and in a way our frontline staff, we talk about frontline now all to do with COVID, but our tourism frontline staff need to be thought of more and considered more and treated better. So thank you, Andre, for bringing that to our attention. And so on that note, also, it's something that maybe we should watch this space on. SATSA did, prior to the work on animal attractions and interactions, launched an initiative called the Tourism Conservation Fund, which was addressing that very kind of elephant in the room, if you want to say that we have to look beyond the wildlife we're trying to protect and look to the communities and make sure that the tourism value chain, that economic value chain, goes into the broader communities around national parks. We mustn't be so obsessed with the fencing and the protection and the patrolling of protecting what's inside the parks. We need to look at enhancing and the beneficiation outside of those fences so that what is inside the fences can be protected. So we need to start looking at how to incorporate communities more in our conservation efforts, and the job creation going very, very local, and the destination of those tourism dollars staying local and not into big chains and corporates and so on. And what else can I comment on? If we're talking about sustainability, all of us here, and especially Shannon and Sherwin, about the efforts that you're putting into bringing that to the forefront of your consumers' choices, is the challenge of the air shaming trend, and how embarrassed should we be that we want people to travel, and especially travel long haul, or whether should we be embarrassed at all? And I think that's a great thing that maybe all of us could comment on now, because we also looked into that and seeing, it's the short distance travel that is perhaps the most harmful, repeated short distance commuting and getting somewhere, versus a one-off long haul annually, which can then benefit conservation enormously by bringing those visitors in. So we don't want visitors to be scared off by an air shaming kind of campaign, because if you book a flight and contribute to planting a tree, you actually just think of that. You book a flight and you're contributing to amazing conservation work in the destination that you're traveling to. So there is an offset almost just by getting to that destination. And then very lastly, on my list of responses, John Monsoon put a question in the chat. And I love that question, because that I can take directly to my so-called bosses at SATSA. A lot of recommendations came out of our study and our guidelines. The guide and the tool weren't the end. The process was the means to an end, and that wasn't the end. The end was the recommendations that we came up with for SATSA and for South African tourism, which is governed by our governments, and for our governing authorities in environment and in tourism and even in economics and so on. And we looked very much at this issue of accreditation. That's pretty much what you're asking for, vetting and accrediting. And it's a minefield. So just very briefly to respond to John, it's a minefield. It's a huge challenge. We have looked into it. We are considering it. We wish we had the budget and the money to do it. SATSA is a membership association. And during COVID now, not a lot of members have a lot of money to go around. But John, it's not forgotten. It is under consideration.
Thanks, Kira. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what our other panelists think around John's question about how far away we are from badging vetted sustainable experiences in South Africa. I don't know, Shannon, do you, I mean, with the work that you've done internationally, are you seeing any form of star rating that's used around sustainable experiences anywhere? And Sherwin, is that something that people look for? Be very keen to know.
Yeah. So I do have a lot of very strong opinions on accreditation schemes. So currently, there goes that diplomacy again. Currently, there are more than 350 sustainable certification schemes globally. And as many of you will know, we have a certifier to certify the certification schemes in the GSTC. Now, there are a lot of very reputable organizations, and my position is such that an organization such as the Travel Corporation, operating in so many countries with offices in 30 plus and et cetera, a certification scheme for us was simply not going to be tenable for the reasons that it was going to force us into a situation where we left an awful lot of opportunity to change our operational behaviors on the table, whilst we tried to sort of check the boxes. So for us, it simply doesn't work because we're too complex. Nothing's really made for us, and so we needed a sustainability strategy and a carbon strategy in line with GHG, ISO, so on and so forth. So we did it our own. Now we're a different animal because we have the resources to do that. Where I think certification and accreditation schemes are useful are for local inbound, where they don't have the resources and yet they would like a guide. I see in this industry, and Kira, you probably see the same, a lot of operators and suppliers on the ground say, I want to get on board. I don't have the time to figure it out. Where do I start? And that is very fair. And so I will always prefer guidelines, and here's how you can do it, and here's how it works in your region, because no two regions are the same. And I will always be a little alarmed by badges, frankly, simply because I don't think that they are always worth it. But again, I will always be allowed to be proven wrong. I think that being guides and showing operators what they should do, how to start, is really the best place to go. I'll also say that if you're keen to start in terms of, integrating sustainability into your DNA, there are so many resources out there, and just start anywhere and don't worry about where you're starting, because it's a massive, massive topic, and the moment you dig in, it starts to build, and that is the evolution of sustainability at an organization. Is a wonderful thing, and it takes a long time. That was the first question. There was another question, I think.
No, that's great, and I think you've touched on the point. Evolution. We think sustainability is this destination. You have arrived. You are sustainable. It is not. It is a journey. And we freak ourselves out because we think we have to achieve this ideal sustainability state, when actually, if we just made steps in the right direction incrementally, and we were better tomorrow than we are today, that's still good. But we get paralyzed by this notion of you must be sustainable, essentially. Kira, I see you've unmuted yourself, so I'm going to hand over to you, and then I'm going to hand over to Sherwin, who was after you, and then Andre. Everybody wants to weigh in on this, Shannon.
Yes, I'd just like to confirm what Shannon said in our consideration of that accreditation, because we got so many requests after we published that, oh, please now accredit, make a list. Can you put it on your website? Just list everyone that fits your criteria or passes this decision tree. And we didn't for good reason, and we haven't gone the accreditation route for good reason. Shannon, you listed many that we completely agree with. And the one that wasn't said is that it's out of date as soon as the ink is dry. So, accreditation, you have to go and inspect. So it's manually intensive. You can't just, do it over the phone or from a website. So it's costly. That's one thing. But it can look good on the day that you go, or they pass in the day, and you don't know in the next 12-month cycle, if you are able to even inspect everything on an annual basis, whether they've kept up with those practices. And then a tourist goes there and then gets back to you and says, I followed your list and this place did this and this and this. So accreditation exposes you to a huge amount of liability at any moment in time that the list or the badge doesn't match the reality. But also in doing our decision tree, our toolkits, we really wanted to put the agency into the individual's hands and the consumer's hands. We handhold too much across life. Put a guardrail on a mountain slope, we say, be careful, you don't fall. Well, you can also watch your feet and choose which mountains to climb. So you've got to have agency for your decisions. And we wanted to have something maybe for the first time that could be put into the hands of every buyer, whether you're a tourist or an operator, and you've got accountability to use it and make your choices, because it's so simple. It either measures up or it doesn't. So trying to shift the responsibility away from an accrediting agency, and then agreeing with Shannon, just because there are so many, and then you just become one more. So those were a couple of the reasons that we've always borne in mind. And then, if with giving people a tool that they can use, then it just becomes a factor. You don't have to ban anything. You don't have to pass law in a country about what's seen as good or bad, because the money will talk. If enough people use such a tool, they won't buy. And when volumes shrink, it will just make certain business practice unsustainable. And we can effectively close down poor business practice simply by educating the buyer and stopping the flow of money. But equally channeling the money into the good work. So not just stopping it altogether, like making sure that money is spent, but then spent in the true conservation efforts and facilities. So that's what we were trying and still trying to do with our tool. And then Natalia, I love what you said about that it's not static. And so our process and our guideline, which leads into the tool, talks about how we identified or thought about this concept called a line in the sand, taking that phrase and saying that in 2019, we could identify where we were going to put the line in the sand, because you can't reach heaven straight away. And we know what our ideal is. We identified it. And that is where we hope to get to, but we realize it's a journey and a process for an industry that really has to change. And we want to keep as many people in the conversation for as long as possible. If you just say you are wrong, you're out, then you never get them to change. So keep the people in the conversation, draw a line in the sand, which was reasonable. And then every year we're trying to see and advance that line further and further. And so if you ever do look at our tool, this idea of moving from a red zone through the orange, yellow into the green, we want to shift that line, in the next 20 years, further and further into the green. The 6 questions, the criteria change, and eventually we will get closer to heaven. Where the 5 of us probably want to be, but you can't get everyone there straight away.
Yeah, it's a journey. Sherwin, first you, and then Andre.
I love the fact that the younger generation is going to force the change to come, because this is something that is very, very important. And I love this concept that conservation is only one tool in the armor of preservation. And if we talk about preservation, then absolutely all of our tourist activities and efforts need to protect, defend, and fight for local communities, making sure that the true value chain, to Kira and Andre's point, is actually being touched by conservation. But to just go back to Kira's point about air shaming, I think there's a great opportunity for us certainly in market here. We have looked at carbon neutral itineraries. So guests who book with us will be, a part of their air travel costs is going to be offset into other ways. And Shannon, maybe you can articulate how we have done that. But That's a powerful message, because long haul travel is a reality. And to get to Africa, people are going to have to get on a plane. So we have African travel by 2020, late 2023, would literally be carbon neutral on all of our experiences, which is such a great accolade to the work that Shannon and the team has done to help us get there. But Shannon, if you could share how we've done so to help our in-country partners.
Sure. Forgive me. Do you mind if I step in, or would you guys want?
Yeah. Go for it.
So that is a whole massive kettle of fish. I'm really glad you brought it up, because the reality is travel and tourism is such a massive success globally, and communities we know are so critically reliant on us globally. To stop travel is not an option. We all know this, nor is it even. It doesn't hold any utility with respect to even the climate conversation. The conversation really ought to be about, and I saw this was listed in the chat earlier, about sustainable aviation fuel, alternative fuel sources, because that is what's damaging. However, interesting to note is, if you're looking for something equally damaging and something that you can make a change on tomorrow, it's your food waste. Globally, food waste accounts for about, forgive me, I'm terrible with statistics, it's either equal to or greater than air travel. I'm going to look that up. Someone's going to tell me I'm wrong, but it's massive. So food waste is something that we have taken on in earnest. So we have a climate action plan. It's 5 points, and it's really led with measuring, which is not easy. I will say that. We have an online tool that measures all of our carbon output at our offices. We have built a custom trip carbon calculator so that we understand the GHG emissions per pax per region per day. And we are offsetting those costs. We're rolling our brands out, as Sherwin said, on a rolling basis. So we started with Kentucky, our youth brands came first, and then our African brands are going to be late 23, 24, will just be fully carbon neutral brands. Now, that means we have to rely on another potentially problematic issue, or let's call it an interim solution, because I don't want to hang my hat on it: carbon offsets. So carbon offsets, our plan is to rely on them and increase our reductions so that our reliance on carbon offsets shrinks until we can hopefully not be relying on offsets. So we do purchase carbon offsets through verified projects. We also, via our TreadRight Foundation, invest in new developing carbon removal solutions, because not only must we offset, we also have to pull the carbon that is in excess out of our atmosphere. It's difficult. We have an expert on our team, Nadine, who handles all of this for us, because we are such a massive organization, and because we do need to take it quite seriously. And I do not think the message to consumers should be stay home and then, you're fine. The message must be one of change. And it's something Kira said earlier, and that we believe in wholeheartedly. Back to animal welfare, if we work with an operator and we find that they're not meeting our criteria, as I said, we won't walk away, because that does nothing for that community and the people that rely on those jobs. We'll work with them to affect that change. And that's what this is all about: changing practices. It's not stopping travel. It's not stopping wildlife tourism. It's the long game of adjustments. And Kira, something I keep wanting to say to you, because it might have utility for you: the decision tree. It's very similar to how our Make Travel Matter experiences work. And we have a tool that we built. We only use it internally, and allows our team to put a Make Travel Matter experience through our tool. It will say, yes, it's good, it meets our criteria. No, it doesn't, and here's why. And I will send it to you, because there might be some, yeah, okay, great. I put that in my notes.
Homework for you, Shannon. Andre, you wanted to weigh in. Sorry, we got a little bit waylaid with flight shaming, but it was fascinating.
Sorry.
That's fine. I've sort of been distracted and enthused by the conversation, so I'm going to have to go back to my notes on this, and it might seem a little bit out of place at the moment, but I just wanted to get back to that, creating a regulated environment where, as opposed to rather providing people with guidelines and the ability to self-regulate and self-action what they need. In the risk management world, we've got the 3 R's, we call it readiness, response, and recovery. And we could almost apply it to this sort of space where, you know, you could really term, there's a major risk in Africa of losing our wilderness areas to overpopulation, pressure from communities. So we need to understand, what do we need to do as operators and agents who are reliant on our wilderness areas to make sure that we mitigate that risk. And all of this conversation is pertinent. You know, we need to act in not only a responsible, a sustainable way, but a regenerative way. We've got to create better environments because they're already impacted wherever you go. We don't have primary untouched environments. They're few and far between. They've all been impacted just by the fact that there's operations in place and fences up. So we need to create that sense of readiness to the travel community to say, we are ready to receive you. We are conducting ourselves in a responsible manner. We are hoping that your travel to our destination is going to help us rejuvenate and regenerate wilderness areas so that they are in a better state than when you arrived. And we need to keep that communicate. One of the comments in the box was keep that conversation open. This can't be done by a panel or a cabinet. It's got to be done in conversation. So we create a sense of readiness as best we can. We respond to situations with sort of meaningful action, and we then feed back our learnings, communicate our learnings, share our learnings as a community to continually build on what we've got. That's how we're going to build traveler confidence. That's how we're going to increase our reputation as a responsible destination. And the result of that would be areas that are sort of conserved and preserved, as Sherwin said. So I think we need to consider the subject of traveler confidence, reputation managed conservation, consider it as a community and almost consider it as a risk management model in order to make sure that it's there going forward.
Thanks, Andre. I want to pick up on something that Lee said, and it's really only been on my radar in the last 3 months. Please don't judge me. I'm not going to look at your faces when I ask you. And he's spoken about places like Gabon becoming popular. They have 11% of the country dedicated to national parks, second only to Costa Rica in the world. You know, those of us who live in South Africa think South Africa is it. You know, South Africa, we have a terrible, terrible way of just forgetting that there is an entire exciting continent out there. And I know I was on a call about the Congo a few days ago and how incredible the Congo is from a conservation perspective, but the reputation of Africa as this place that, and I was in Sierra Leone 2 months ago and everybody thinks, oh, Sierra Leone, oh my goodness, you know, and it was the most incredible, amazing place. But we have a real reputation issue in the African continent that I think is an obstacle to getting people to come to Africa to support our conservation initiatives. Now, is that a story I'm telling myself, Sherwin, or do you agree with me?
Sorry, I got to get the unmute button to go off. Let me start first by just reflecting back on what you have said. In the US, the top Africa destination for travel is still South Africa. And that is largely because of the diversity of experiences the single destination has to offer. And secondly, the value for money based on exchange between the US dollar and the rand. So there is an attraction for going to a third world country with a first world infrastructure. So South Africa definitely will still be, in my view, a top destination for US travel. but that is slowly changing. It's slowly changing because other destinations are doing a great job in marketing their difference and response to Africa. For example, Rwanda is a destination that is getting a lot of accolade. It's expensive to purchase a permit to go gorilla trekking. It's expensive, $1,500 per person. They make no apology for the fact that if you're going to come to Rwanda, that's what you are paying, and that money is going to be invested to protect mountain gorillas. And they have a success story. Their success story is that for the first time since the 1970s, gorillas numbers have surpassed 1,000 in the wild. And that's because of good conservation efforts. So when people, certainly conscious conservation enthusiasts, hear and see how destinations are actively working as part of growing their conservation efforts, South Africa still has work to be done. And that, I think the work is being done, but there are other destinations that are catching up. So I will tell every South African, if you're not going to be passionate about your destination, no one else will. And as an expat of South Africa, I beat that South African drum loudly and unapologetically. But we do have work to do. I think the next few years is going to be marked out by our industry's efforts to affect change by building a better world, whether that is carbon change or climate change or conservation change. These buying decisions are becoming more and more important for travelers. And as a destination, if we can amplify what we are doing and not only have the guidelines in place, but have reputable checks and balances, it will absolutely resonate and people will come.
Great. Thanks for beating our drum, Sherwin. Shannon, over to you, and then Kira, if I may.
I'll keep it snappy, and he does beat that drum. I can support that. But just something that Andre said a few moments ago, I just want to bring it back because I think it is critical, and it's critical for us at the Travel Corporation. Andre, you mentioned reputational risk, and for me that all ladders up into business resiliency. And we have an entire executive committee on which I sit that's involved in this, and so it is I report directly to our chief executive Brett Tolman, and I just think it's critical to identify that is because all of us identify that sustainability and resiliency are the same. One supports the other, and I always like to bring that to the attention from anybody that's out there and kind of just tipping their toe in the water. That's how we view it, and as we all know, we're not small, and so this of course has elements of altruism, but also resiliency is in tourism that means sustainability.
Great point, Shannon. Kira.
Yes, just to your question about reputation and whether it's a story telling yourself, I think there is a basis for it, perhaps not in the US market, and Shannon and Sherwin maybe not aware of it, but the struggles that Natalia, you and I know very, very well, we've been battling with reputation management from our other major source market, the UK, and around travel red lists and the COVID era, let's say. And it really, I think there is merit to saying there's a perception and a reputational legacy or hangover that clouds facts, because we know from our science and our studies and our arguments putting forward that there's no basis for how they see and view South Africa in this current era, the UK that is. So I think we have to constantly put that brave face on and constantly keep our messaging up, because we're starting a little bit behind the starting line. Everyone else is at the gun and we're behind the gun because we're being held back by reputation issues that actually don't have much basis anymore. So that was the one thing. And then to the comments in the chat about, and also what we've been saying about other African destinations starting to do like a really good job about promoting themselves. And I'm so happy about that. I mean, we've been trying to get people to Burundi and Rwanda for many years, and they were so skeptical. So it's good. But as a South African, obviously, still want us to be top of the pops and stay there and just have the others a little closer to us. But I want to be at the top. And I think we've just to talk to the audience here and just say that South Africa, in a way, is unique with what is known about it and what messaging gets out there, because we have such a vibrant and active press. So we have a strong journalism community, and a strong press, a strong and free press, and we have great science. So we are very advanced in our scientific space and our media space. So not much is hidden. And so if it is a new strain of COVID, our scientists pick it up and they report on it and they get it out to the world because that's going to help. And if there is poaching numbers and stats, they will get it out and it'll get reported on. And so other countries that may have government tourism agencies like we do putting out a positive message, that might be the only message that gets out, and some of the lesser issues don't get coverage. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if you hear bad things about South Africa, because it actually shows that our democracy and our freedoms are protected and thriving.
And actually, Kira, to your point, and I'll have this as our concluding point, the discussion that you're talking about with the red list, conservation and the importance of bringing people to South Africa has actually been the core area of focus for the lobby work that we have been doing to remove South Africa from the red list. So it hasn't actually been the science. It hasn't been that there isn't a scientific base. It has been, we are reliant, our conservation and our community efforts are reliant on inbound tourism. And that is what those markets care about most. So we have seen from a lobby perspective that really is the discussion point. It's not the science. They don't care about the science, but they really do care about and are invested in the conservation and community efforts that are happening, not just in South Africa, but across Africa, essentially. On that note, I'd like to thank Andre, Kira, Sherwin, and Shannon for joining me in the last hour. Sherwin, you can go home and have some coffee. Shannon, you still got half your day ahead of you. Really appreciate it. It was a joy to meet you, finally, having worked in the TreadRight space for a while. And Andre and Kira, as always, my friendly South African face, is lovely to have you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this call. We've recorded it and we will release it in the coming days. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. Thanks so much. Cheers, everyone. Bye.